Say, what happened to the feminists? In the middle of the last decade, they seemed to be everywhere. Radical feminists took over the movement and started attacking the foundations of liberal society. This prompted many left-wing liberals, including myself, to turn aggressively against them. But then we found that because of that, we were ostracized by the so-called left. A lot of water had gone under the bridge since then, and nowadays, you hardly hear from these radical feminists. Most of those who stood up against them are back in the fold of the left, and seem to think that it is a thing of the past. But I still can't identify with what is called the left today, because the reason the feminists fell silent is not that liberal thought defeated them. They actually fell victim to the very ideology that they promulgated, the social justice ideology that is still eating away at the liberal spirit, and preventing us from honestly dealing with society's problems. And now it has exploded in a very sad and ugly way, in the case of J.K. Rowling versus the transgendered activists. This video is going to be a reaction to a video ContraPoints recently made on the issue, in which he mainly reacted to an open letter that Rowling published on her website, explaining her position. Both the video and the letter are well made, thoughtful, painful, and moving. Both women try to have empathy to the other side's position, and yet both fail miserably. And they fail because their social justice ideology gets in the way. This video offers a post-mortem of their failure. Let's first do a quick reminder what is this ideology that we are talking about. We first need to differentiate between liberal feminism and radical feminism. Liberal feminism works within the liberal democratic system to solve concrete problems that women have in our society. Radical feminism, on the other hand, believes that there is no point working within the system. It sees Western culture as a patriarchy that is designed to maintain the dominance of men over women, and must be overthrown by revolution. This revolution is to be done by a radical change to our language. They believe that if we adopt the right language, instead of the allegedly oppressive language that we have today, gender equality will be achieved. Thus, we get cancel culture, which tries to get anyone who dares to stray away from the politically correct language erased from the public sphere. There is another idea that typifies radical feminism, an idea that is borrowed from Marxism. That the oppressed group, in this case women, is the one that holds the truth that will liberate us from our current state of inequality. Thus, it is women who should dictate the right language. Men should listen and believe to women, and follow their lead without questioning. If you don't, it means that you are in favor of the oppressive system, and thus a misogynist that must be cancelled. To get the social justice ideology, however, we need to add another ingredient: intersectionality. The idea is that every individual is an intersection of several group identities that they belong to. When we fight for that individual's rights, then, we must be mindful of the unique problems presented by the intersection of their identities. This actually makes sense, but when this idea is coupled with radical feminism, the result is disastrous. Since radical feminism does not believe in fighting for the individual, but focuses on overthrowing the patriarchy, what ends up getting intersectionalized is not the individual but the patriarchy. So the patriarchy is no longer just the patriarchy. It is the imperialist, white supremacist, heteronormative, cisnormative, capitalist patriarchy. And everyone should focus all of their efforts on bringing it down. Thus, all minorities have been incorporated into this fight, and cannot fight for the particular problems that they have. And, inevitably, as we shall see, they just start portraying one another as agents of the patriarchy, and tear each other apart. I should note that the terms social justice and social justice warrior are now being used for other sorts of ideologies and activities. First of all, there are right-wingers who use the term SJW to label anyone to the left of them, and even I have been called an SJW once or twice. Secondly, there are some leftists now who are trying to reclaim the term, and they are not as bad as the SJWs of 5 years ago. For the purpose of this video, I am going to rigidly define social justice as the ideology that I have just delineated. So, remember that this is what I am talking about. Looking back, it seems that the introduction of intersectionality into radical feminism was simply a power play by black feminists. When feminists like Kimberly Crenshaw and Bell Hooks introduced it in the 90s, it gave black feminists the upper hand within the movement, since they could portray themselves as more oppressed than white feminists. Thus, by the rules of social justice, it meant that they were the ones holding the truth that will liberate us, and the white feminists should follow their lead. Still, if we go back to 2015, it was white women who dominated feminist discourse in the public sphere. This lasted until the election of Donald Trump, when it came out that he got the majority of the white women vote. After that, white women came to be regarded in social justice circles as tools of the white supremacist patriarchy, and white feminists were marginalized. Non-white women became the dominant force within the movement. But there is always a bigger fish. When the transgender issue became more prominent within the social justice movement, the feminists suddenly found themselves in a serious bind. Why? Well, here's a very short explanation. First, we have to differentiate between sex and gender. I'll elaborate about it later, but for now we will just say that sex is rooted in our biology. We have either XX or XY chromosomes, and rarely some other combination. These genetics lead us to have either a male or female biology. Gender refers more to our social identities, to how we behave. It is also rooted in our biology, but much of it is social construct, the way we are taught to behave by the culture we grow into. Most of us believe that gender is something that evolved through history, through cultural changes that shaped the way we perceive males and females, and how they should behave. Liberal feminism believes that some of the beliefs, traditions, and prejudices that were created over the years are detrimental to the well-being of today's women, and should therefore be updated. Radical feminism, on the other hand, believes that the patriarchy has imposed gender roles that are not rooted in biological reality, but in the wish to ensure the domination of males over females. A lot of sophistry is used to argue that gender is nothing but a social construct. This constructed oppressive relation, they argue, is bad for both sexes, and we will all be better once we get rid of it. Only the feminists, driven by their female nature, are able to see the truth that will liberate us all. Therefore, we should all follow their lead and accept the language that they are imposing. Trans activists use the same logic, with one little difference. While social justice feminists believe that biological sex is real and gender is a construct, the social justice transgendered claim that gender is real, while biological sex is the construct. And they use the same kind of sophistry to make these arguments. Thus, we have two social justice factions that are diametrically opposed and contradict each other. They cannot possibly coexist. So the question becomes, how do we tell which one is right? Well, remember the rules of social justice. The truth is with the oppressed. We must play the oppression Olympics, find which one is more oppressed, and go with their truth. And since most SJWs agree that the transgendered are more oppressed, they win. Most social justice feminists humbly accept this verdict, which effectively means that they have to give up on their ideology. But some feminists refuse to give up on their life struggle. They want to hold on to their truth, and the only way they can do so is to win the oppression Olympics against the trans. How can they do that? There is only one way, and that is to deny that trans women are women, and claim that they are men. And so we get the TERFs, who claim that trans women are just men trying to use their male privileges to muscle in on their woman identity. Alas for the TERFs, their position is very hard to defend. It is very hard to make people believe that trans women, many of whom suffer a lot of hardships due to their identity, are just privileged men. The TERFs lose the oppression Olympics, their position is rejected, and, according to the rules of social justice, they get cancelled. And so, the trans SJWs manage to defeat their enemies within the social justice movement. However, when your MO is to cancel your opponents instead of trying to defeat their ideas, there is a danger that one day you will run into someone who is too big to cancel. And then those ideas that you try to bury will also acquire a much bigger megaphone. And to the chagrin of the trans activists, they have made an enemy of the most successful author in the world. J.K. Rowling has now become the voice of the radical feminist side of this debate. Another problem with this MO is that once you go down that path, it never ends. Within the social justice trans movement itself, there are factions that are trying to cancel other factions. And so, ContraPoints, one of the biggest trans YouTubers, became target for cancellation, for reasons that are irrelevant to this video. We have two women here who have felt the wrath of a Twitter mob because their social justice values were deemed as not social justicey enough. They both reflect on it in their comments, but they are both still committed to the ideology, and it blinds them to the true reasons why they are being cancelled. It also prevents them from listening to each other. Both Joanne's letter and Natalie's video are very long. This video will not do them justice, as I want to focus on just a few points. I put the links below, and I recommend you read and watch them. But now let's get to my reaction. Let's begin with Natalie.
So, now that 2020 is finally over, I think we can let the record conclusively show that it was a year whomst is bad. And on top of everything else that was going on, truly the last thing we needed was the author of Harry Potter coming forward to announce there's two things she can't stand: bigotry and the transgenders. So what I want to do in this video is take Joanne's pain seriously and treat her like a complex human being, while also being critical of the things she said about the transgender question. And I also want to explore where the Twitter mob is coming from, because they're in pain too, and don't they also deserve our understanding?
This is Natalie's statement of intent, and I'm going to judge her video based on it. Then, she makes another statement of intent.
So, we're gonna go through the things that Joanne has said about trans people, but I don't want this to be just a drama video or a video saying, cancel Harry Potter, drag her. Like, I wanna try to do something a little bit more meaningful than that. So, I'm gonna use J.K. Rowe as a case study in bigotry and see if we can maybe learn something about what bigotry is, how does it work, and how do otherwise good people get drawn into it.
So this is the main theme of her video, and this is what we shall start with. Let's see what ContraPoints has to say about bigotry.
Prejudices are made up of tropes, stereotypes, narratives, arguments, which we aren't born knowing, we have to learn them. No one is born thinking that the gays are destroying the family, or that women are naturally subservient, or that the Jews are trying to control the world economy.
That is true, but there is something missing in this description. We are not born with these beliefs, but there is something that is natural to us, and that is our fear of the different, of the other. It is this fear that makes us susceptible to adopt prejudiced views. So while we are not born with prejudices, it is in our nature to become prejudiced, and we have to work against our nature to overcome this propensity. But in the view of social justice, which ContraPoint seems to share, we are naturally without prejudice, and it is the patriarchy that chafes us to be prejudiced. Thus, while most of us understand that the way to cure transphobia is through education, through learning to understand trans people and thus stop fearing them, SJWs believe that you just have to teach people to repeat social justice dogma, like parrots, and they will not be transphobic to begin with. Thus, instead of pushing for free debate, through which people will understand the issue, the trans SJWs are shutting down debate and trying to silence anyone who goes against the dogma. Later, Natalie makes a distinction between two styles of bigotry.
There's really two different styles of bigotry. They express the same prejudice, but they're very different in tone. I'll call the two styles direct bigotry and indirect bigotry. Direct bigotry is openly contemptuous. It's a bigotry manifested in slurs and outright discrimination and demonizing the target group, and calls for shunning, subordination, or even violence. Whereas indirect bigotry manifests as concern or debate about a host of proxy issues. It's often defensive in tone rather than offensive. Frequently the claim is that a once needed liberation movement has now gone too far, that it's now the activists who are the new oppressors, who are disturbing law and order with violent and chaotic protests, who are victimizing and silencing innocent people by calling them bigots, who are infiltrating the media and replacing good old-fashioned entertainment with politically correct propaganda. And of course, ordinary people are too intimidated to speak speak out against it, because cancel culture is out of control and free speech is under attack.
I agree that the right column can be a mask that many bigots use. But ContraPoints doesn't portray it as a mask. She portrays it as bigotry. I'd like to think that she doesn't really believe that everyone expressing concern or fighting for free speech is a bigot. But what bothers me is that she doesn't make a distinction between several levels of prejudice, which are not all bigotry. I see at least 4 levels. First, there are those who might casually repeat prejudiced terms and phrases, not realizing that they are bigoted. They are just ignorant. Then there are those who hold prejudiced beliefs, not realizing that the facts disprove them. I would not call them bigots, just prejudiced. Then there are those who, besides being prejudiced about a certain group, also harbor negative feelings towards that group. Unlike those who are just prejudiced, this type of people would react with hostility to your attempts to disprove their prejudices. I would call them unconscious bigots, or irrational bigots. And then there are those who have an ideology that is biased against a group of people. They are rational, conscious bigots. Every one of these different types requires a different kind of approach, if you want to cure them of their prejudices. And for that, you have to first distinguish between them. If a prejudiced person expresses concern about the group that they are prejudiced against, then accept that they genuinely feel concern, and explain to them why their views are wrong. If a bigoted person expresses concern, it is often just to mask their bigotry, and you should expose and shame them for it. The problem is, SJWs don't recognize these different levels, because they changed the definition of bigotry, and adopted the equation bigotry equals prejudice plus power. To them, it only matters which group you belong to. If you are prejudiced, and you also belong to the group that has power, then you are a bigot, even if it is just due to ignorance.
Being mean or rude or even abusive is not bigotry unless it's tied to a history of oppression or a backlash against a movement of equality.
Yeah, you will never be able to effectively fight bigotry with this approach. But let's leave the issue of bigotry for now, and get back to it later. It's time to get down from the theoretical level to street level, and follow the chain of events that sparked this whole kerfuffle.
The real story begins in December 2019, when Joanne tweeted the hashtag #IStandWithMaya, referencing Maya Forstater. Maya Forstater is an English consultant who lost her contract with the nonprofit she worked for after she did transphobic tweets.
Yes, I think that male people are not women. I don't think that being a woman or female is a matter of identity or womanly feelings. It is biology.
Another says,
Some people believe that a person with a penis can be a woman. Some, a majority, don't. Neither group should be discriminated against in everyday life, but in situations involving taking your clothes off with strangers, integration of the two groups is not possible.
And there's a cartoon of a hairy-armed, hairy-legged, burgeoning trans woman flashing her penis at cis women and saying, "It's alright, it's a woman's penis."
So it began when J.K. Rowling expressed support for a TERF, who claims that male people are not women. How does Natalie refute this claim? Well, she doesn't. She prefers to divert the discussion elsewhere.
I'm not a huge fan of the slogan, "Trans women are women." And this is just my opinion, I don't speak for any other trans people, but there's a couple things I don't like about it. It tends to invite the response, well, what does it even mean to be a woman? Define womanhood. And now, you're immediately getting baited into some bullshit semantic debate about what is a real woman. It doesn't really matter, does it? This is metaphysics, and life is too short for metaphysics. You know, some questions should be dissolved rather than solved. That's what Wittgenstein said. That's right, we're dragging Ludwig into this.
Natalie says that she wants to move away from the metaphysical question. The slogan that she wants to promote is Trans Liberation Now, which focuses on the concrete problems and biases that trans people encounter. Sensible approach, but the problem is, the entire question of trans rights hinges upon which metaphysics we believe in. If you don't win the metaphysical battle, you will not win the liberation battle. And you are right, it is about language. But language isn't always just semantics. Since you brought Ludwig into this, I will refer you to a video made 2 years ago, in which I use Wittgenstein to argue that trans women are women. Here, I will provide a shorter explanation. So those who say that sex is real, like J.K. Rowling, mean that our sex is determined by our biology. We have either XX or XY chromosomes, and we can't change this fact. This is true. However, they usually don't just say you can't change your chromosomes. They say you can't change being male, or you can't change being man. And in that, they are ascribing biological reality to words. And this is patently wrong. Words are not part of our biology. Words are social constructs. They are something that humans made up to describe the world. And the question of what exactly a certain word describes, the question of meaning, is determined by agreement between us. A lot of people don't like to hear that a word like male is merely a matter of agreement. They think it means that we can just agree to change its meaning whenever we please. Well, no. The concepts of male and female were created tens of thousands of years ago. They are connected to many other words in our language. Our grammar is practically based on them. So if you suddenly change their meaning, our entire language will crumble. Then again, languages do change and evolve. Words acquire new meanings, and sometimes change their meaning. The existence of transgendered people is challenging the traditional meaning of some words, and asking us to modify them. What we have to ask is it justified? In other words, is it a better description of reality? We have to remember that words like male and female were created long before we knew about chromosomes, so their meaning is attached to many other attributes. Having XX chromosomes leads you to have female biological attributes. But every XX person is different, so there is no accurate definition to the word female. Rather, it describes a range. There are certain biological attributes that are more typical to those with XX chromosomes, and if a certain organism possesses mainly those attributes, we label it a female body. It is within the range of the biological sex that we call female. Can someone change their biological sex and transition from male to female? I would argue that yes, they can. If you do plastic surgery that changes your anatomy, and if you undergo hormonal treatment that causes your body to start functioning mostly as a female body, then you have changed your biology to be within the range of what we call female. What you cannot change, at least not with today's science, is your genetical makeup. That remains XY. But, as I said, we do not use only the chromosomes to determine whether we define a body as male or female. There are other attributes, and if most of these attributes are female, then you are a female. ContraPoints uses the term chromosomal sex in her video, so I'll adopt it. We all agree that you cannot change your chromosomal sex, but biological sex can be changed. Now, when we talk about transgendered people, we are not talking about sex transition. We are talking about gender transition. And the definition of gender is even more complicated, because gender is not just about your biology, but also about your behavior, about what is called gender expression. When you are born, you are assigned a gender based on your chromosomal sex, and then you are brought up to express yourself in a way that is typical to your gender. But there is also behavior that is innate. There are certain behaviors which feel natural to us, which we are comfortable performing. As we grow up, we find out which expressions are right for us, and some of these expressions might not be typical to our gender. Authoritarian societies often forbid people to adopt such expressions, but in the liberal Western society, we decide for ourselves. And there are some people for which most of these expressions fall in the range of the other gender, so they feel alienated to the gender identity they were assigned at birth. Often they also feel alienated to their biological sex, and want most of their biology to be that of the other sex. And thus they transition. By these rules, then, if a chromosomal male feels alienated to their assigned gender, and their self-image falls within the range of what we call a woman, and they want to be called a woman, then she is a woman. The TERFs are wrong on this. A lot of people have a problem to understand what I just said, and that is because they have a problem separating between words and the thing that they signify. Some people ask me if calling someone a dog means that they are a dog. My answer to that is that, well, I know quite a few people who are bitches. To that you might say, okay, but they are not actual bitches. And my answer would be, yes they are. They fit everything that we mean when we call a person a bitch. So you'll say, but the bitches you talk about don't have canine genetics. And I will say, no one says they do. The word bitch initially signified female dog, but has acquired additional meanings over the years. So it can now be used to accurately describe people. Similarly, the word woman has long ago acquired more meanings than just a human with female genitalia. So it can be used to signify humans that don't. No one who says trans women are women means that they have XX chromosomes. We mean that they fall within the range covered by the word woman. I know she has a penis, but this is a woman. There is more than enough here to override the penis. The other side of it is that, since a word covers many different instances, it can change its meaning depending on the context. If you try to register as a participant in a dog show, on the grounds that everyone says you're a bitch, they will tell you, sorry, here, when we say bitch, we refer to a female dog. Similarly, there are contexts in which trans women are different from other women. Most of the time, I will think of a trans woman as a woman. But say I bring her in a bad condition to an emergency room. Then I will not say this woman needs help. I will say, this is a trans woman and she needs help. The doctors need to know. The debate we should be having is what are these contexts in which trans women should be regarded differently, and what is the appropriate way to handle these cases. Instead, the debate is what we witness in this video. Let's dive back into the awfulness. Let's take another look at Maya Forstater's tweets. I am not going to go into the question of whether her firing was justified, because this is not the topic at hand. The question is whether her opinion is right or not, because J.K. Rowling seems to think that it is. As we can see, she does not make a distinction between sex and gender. And worse, she believes that words are part of our biology. Now this is a metaphysical belief, and later we will discuss which metaphysics it belongs to. But in Western metaphysics, we do not believe that words are part of our biology. We believe that they are labels that we invent. So to claim that someone is innately male, or innately man, is not a claim that is supported by Western logic. Earlier, I rigidly defined the term SJW for the purpose of this video, and I am at liberty to do so, because it is my video. But I do not have the right to demand that the rest of you adopt my definition, because English is not my language. Language is something that we all share. It is a game that we play, and we have to play by the rules. The rules we play by in the West determine that Forstater's argument is wrong. So all ContraPoints has to do to win this debate is to point this out. But she can't do that, because, as we shall later discuss, she believes in the same metaphysics that Forstater believes in. Which means that she can't debunk TERF arguments, and instead has to rely on psychoanalyzing them to invalidate their position.
So TERFism is it's a hate movement that disguises transphobia as feminism.
No, Natalie. It is a movement that is the logical conclusion of radical feminist ideology. And it is not transphobia. Phobia is irrational, whereas the beliefs of the TERFs are based completely on their rationality. The difference between TERFs and transphobes is that transphobes can be cured of their hate if they become more knowledgeable of the issue. TERFs can never give up on their hate. They hate you because you threaten the very basis of their belief system, the belief that sex is real and gender is a construct.
All transsexuals rape women's bodies by reducing the real female form to an artifact, appropriating this body for themselves.
She claims that trans women are agents of the patriarchy who, quote,
merely cut off the most obvious means of invading women.
Natalie here quotes a TERF called Janice Raymond, and it is a perfect showcase of TERF ideology. TERFs, like all radical feminists, believe that there is no such thing as gender. Woman is simply a word that is interchangeable with human female. Gender, to them, is a construct created by the patriarchy and imposed on the sexes. Males are taught that men should behave in a certain way, and females are taught that women should behave in a certain way, and it is all meant to ensure the domination of men over women. So when these feminists encounter a trans woman, the only way they can explain it is as a new and devious form of domination, in which males change the meaning of what it is to be a woman, and annex it for themselves. Is J.K. Rowling a TERF? Let's see, shall we?
On June 10, J.K. Rowling published an essay to her website, which on Twitter she titled TERF Wars. The essay is several pages long and outlines her reasons for speaking out on sex and gender issues.
Now, ContraPoints doesn't do a completely fair job in representing Rowling's letter, so I will read it myself. Rowling writes that her initial interest in the trans issue was professional, due to a crime series that she is writing. She therefore started to read a lot about it and to follow people discussing it on Twitter, including TERFs. Because of that, she was guilted by association and started receiving accusations and threats from trans activists. Typical SJW behavior, we've all been there. She says that she therefore knew the cost of supporting Maya Forstater and expected the backlash that followed. What surprised her was all the supportive private messages that she got from many people, from many fields, who believe that the current debate about gender is going in a wrong and harmful direction, but are afraid to speak due to the atmosphere of fear set by cancel culture. I am using my own words here, but again, we all know what she is talking about. After that, Rowling writes, I had stepped back from Twitter for many months both before and after tweeting support for Maya, because I knew it was doing nothing good for my mental health. I only returned because I wanted to share a free children's book during the pandemic. Immediately, activists who clearly believed themselves to be good, kind, and progressive people swarmed back into my timeline, assuming a right to police my speech, accuse me of hatred, call me misogynistic slurs, and, above all, as every woman involved in this debate will know, TERF. If you didn't already know, and why should you? TERF is an acronym coined by trans activists, which stands for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminists. In practice, a huge and diverse cross-section of women are currently being called TERFs, and the vast majority have never been radical feminists. Examples of so-called TERFs range from the mother of a gay child who was afraid their child wanted to transition to escape homophobic bullying, to a hitherto totally unfeminist older lady who's vowed never to visit Marks and Spencer again because they are allowing any man who says they identify as a woman into the women's changing rooms. Yeah, I've also been called a TERF once or twice. The word is evolving, like every other word. In this video, I will rigidly use TERF to describe only those who claim that trans women are men, due to their radical feminist ideology. I of course sympathize with what Rowling describes here, but then, she just has to add. Ironically, radical feminists aren't even trans-exclusionary. They include trans men in their feminism, because they were born women. Yeah, get the fuck out of here with this one, Joanne. This is an example of using semantics to mask bigotry. It's just the same as those who claim that they are not anti-Semites, because they don't hate all Semites, only Jews. Also, the fact that TERFs accept trans men because they perceive them as women only makes them more bigoted, not less. Is J.K. Rowling a TERF, by my definition? Well, borderline. She does not claim that trans women are men, but refers to them as trans women. However, she refuses to acknowledge that trans women are women, in any way, and this refusal is rooted in her feminist ideology. She is not hateful like many TERFs, and she does have compassion for the transgendered, but her views ultimately erase their identity, and that's a form of bigotry. You can see it in the section where she claims that she herself, if she grew up in the same atmosphere as today, might have made the mistake of going through gender transition. She writes that, as I didn't have a realistic possibility of becoming a man back in the 1980s, it had to be books and music that got me through both my mental health issues and the sexualized scrutiny and judgment that set so many girls to war against their bodies in their teens. Fortunately for me, I found my own sense of otherness, and my ambivalence about being a woman, reflected in the work of female writers and musicians who reassured me that, in spite of everything a sexist world tries to throw at the female-bodied, it's fine not to feel pink, freely and compliant inside your own head. It's okay to feel confused, dark, both sexual and non-sexual, unsure of what or who you are. We see that Rowling does not believe in the reality of gender. What I mean by that is this. Most of us accept that being female is not just about having a female biology. There are also certain types of behavior and tastes that are more typical to girls than boys. Girls typically like rom-coms, boys typically like action movies, and it is something that is rooted in our nature. This forms the basis of the gender norms, and girls and boys are expected to conform to these norms. However, everyone is different, and some are atypical to their gender. As a teenage girl, Joanne felt alienated to typical girl behavior. She then discovered the writings of radical feminists, who told her that gender expression has nothing to do with our nature, and is entirely constructed by society. It is the patriarchy that teaches girls that they should like rom-coms, and that they should be pink, freely and compliant. Since she didn't feel pink, freely and compliant, she bought into the ideology that told her that gender is a construct. Thus, she sees the whole trans issue as the result of hate towards one's biological sex. It's not that trans men choose to be men because it feels more natural to them to look and act like a man. It's that the patriarchy makes girls hate their female body and their social role, so they want to escape from it. Their gender expression is not rooted in their nature, but is a defense mechanism that they adopted. I will let ContraPoints articulate what I think about Rowling's position.
Trans women do not think that wearing dresses is what makes us women, and trans men do not think that not feeling pink, frilly, and compliant is what makes them men. These are meanings that J.K. Rowling is assigning to trans people's actions in her own brain, because she perceives our lives as some kind of commentary on gender, with an implied ideology about what it means to be a man or a woman. But that's your interpretation, Joanne. That's a meaning that you are imposing on us, because it seems you have a lot of traumatic gender baggage of your own, and it's interfering with your ability to genuinely empathize with trans people.
But why does Rowling believe that she would have chosen that path if living in today's atmosphere? What changed? Most people probably aren't aware, I certainly wasn't, until I started researching this issue properly, that 10 years ago, the majority of people wanting to transition to the opposite sex were male. That ratio has now reversed. The UK has experienced a 4,400% increase in girls being referred for transitioning treatment. Autistic girls are hugely overrepresented in their numbers. Rowling then goes on to discuss research that shows that peer pressure, especially on social media, might affect teens to want to transition. So she basically describes it as something trendy. Before I say what I think about it, I will let Natalie deliver her ContraPoint.
That sounds pretty alarming, right? 4,400%. But you have to keep in mind that 10 years ago, only 32 assigned female patients under 18 were referred, and by last year, that number was 1,740, with the biggest increase happening 5 years ago, the transgender tipping point year. So that is a big increase, but it corresponds to the biggest ever increase in trans visibility, so it does make sense, and there's 11 million children in the UK, so let's say 5.5 million girls and 1,740 is 0.03% of that, and considering that around 1% of adults are some kind of transgender, 0.03% of kids is not really an alarming number to me. If anything, you'd expect it to be higher.
Yeah, that doesn't really refute Rowling's point, though. The claim that 1% of adults have trans tendencies can also be attributed to the trend that she talks about. You'll have to come up with something else. Here's how I explain the increase. We always knew that there were two types of gay people. There were those who weren't distinguishable from regular straight people, except that they were attracted to their own gender. And then there were those that no closet in the world could hide the fact that they were gay, since they were very feminine men or very masculine women. Usually, their parents would say that they knew their kid was gay even when they were 3 years old, since they already behaved this way. A lot of the latter type, nowadays, we define as trans, and that, at least partly, explains the increase. This is the thing we should remember. Gay and trans are words, and words are not innate. It's not that you are born with the words "I am gay" or "I am trans" already etched in your brain. When you grow up, you start to develop certain feelings and preferences. You then find words in our language that correspond to those feelings and preferences. In the past, the closest word that those kids could find was gay, so they thought of themselves as gay. Now they realize that trans more accurately describes their feelings. But if we accept that, then we have to consider that maybe trans is also unsuitable for some of those kids, and there's a better way to define them. And if it is true, as Rowling points out, that studies have shown 60 to 90% of gender dysphoric teens will grow out of their dysphoria, then we might be committing a crime against these teens by not exploring the possibility that maybe there is a better way to define their condition, and instead sending them to commit irreversible changes to their body. This is why it is important to keep on criticizing our current definitions, to keep having a debate. But when you define the wish to debate as a form of bigotry, as the SJWs do, you are preventing us from having it. Rowling writes quite a bit about the current atmosphere of fear that is silencing professionals who have criticism on the way that trans identity is currently defined. But the main thing that prompted Rowling to raise her voice was something else. Joanne reveals, for the first time, that she was the victim of domestic abuse, as her first husband brutalized her in a way that made her live in fear for her life. This made her very sensitive to the issue of women's safety, which is why she had a strong reaction when she read this. On Saturday morning, I read that the Scottish government is proceeding with its controversial gender recognition plans, which will in effect mean that all a man needs to become a woman is to say he is one. To use a very contemporary word, I was triggered. I was finding it hard to contain my anger and disappointment about the way I believe my government is playing fast and loose with women's and girls' safety. The UK government issues what is called a Gender Recognition Certificate, affirming that the carrier is of a certain gender. Now, the Scottish government wants to make it possible for anyone to get such a certificate. All I have to do is declare that I'm a woman, and I'll get it. Rowling focuses on the issue of men thus being granted entry into women's spaces, making them feel insecure. Here's how ContraPoints responds to this fear.
But this talking point that gender change on legal documents will enable predators to enter bathrooms, it doesn't really make sense, because gender policing in public bathrooms doesn't involve legal documents. Like, when was the last time you had to present a gender certificate to gain admittance to a public bathroom? And that's very interesting to me because as a feminine trans woman, I have not once been questioned or had the authorities called on me in a women's public bathroom in the entire time I've been using them, which is several years now. So when Joanne Rowling, a feminine heterosexual woman, calls for more bathroom policing to protect the lesbians or whatever, it just seems ignorant of the way bathroom policing actually works.
Faithful to her resolve to be empathetic towards Joanne, Natalie emphasizes her story of being a battered woman, and expresses empathy to her fears. But then she concludes,
Okay, so for Joanne, her traumatic experience being attacked by a man is psychologically related to her concerns about the legal recognition of trans people, and about trans people saying nasty things about her on Twitter. She feels intensely about this issue because the discourse around it literally triggers her PTSD. I hope it goes without saying that trans people gaining easier access to legal recognition in Scotland in 2020 is completely unrelated to Joanne Rowling being assaulted by a cis man in the 1990s. This is a non sequitur.
except you have completely ignored the actual problem that Rowling warns about. Natalie, you said you were going to be empathetic, but an important part of empathy is to correctly represent the person you are trying to have empathy for. The fear is that these new laws will change the way bathroom entry is policed. You have ignored the argument, and instead psychoanalyzed Rowling's motives. This is not how you do empathy. Let me give you just one scenario. Let's say there is a Scottish man who is an exhibitionist. He enters a women's bathroom and casually flashes himself to a woman. When this kind of thing happens, you usually know when it is sexual in nature. The woman calls the police on him, but the man then pulls out a gender recognition certificate affirming he is a woman, and claims he was merely attending to his business. The woman insists he sexually abused her, and gets arrested for transphobia. What then, Natalie? This is the answer I was waiting to hear from you. How do you prevent something like that from happening under the proposed law? If you don't answer that, I cannot stand with you on this issue.
The current explosion of trans activism is urging a removal of almost all the robust systems through which candidates for sex reassignment were once required to pass.
So that's what she wants. She wants robust systems of medical gatekeeping, which is the same thing Janice Raymond wants, just Joanne's more polite about it.
Really, Natalie? This is what she wants? Janice Raymond, according to you, wanted to limit the number of clinics where trans people can have surgery. She wanted instead to send them to feminist consciousness-raising therapy. Whereas Joanne Rowling, in the very paragraph that you read, simply asked for something more robust than a situation where a man who intends to have no surgery and take no hormones may now secure himself a gender recognition certificate and be a woman in the sight of the law. You don't think there's a middle ground here? So what is the solution to the bathroom problem? I don't know. It's a complicated issue. I'm still trying to figure it out. If you look at all the videos I made on the trans issue, you will find that my opinions are slightly shifting from one vid to the next. But I do believe there is a solution. It starts with accepting that trans women are women, but also remembering that the word woman can change its meaning depending on the context, and that there are some contexts in which being trans sets you apart from other women. Examples include women's sports, women's prisons, beauty salons, and women's bathrooms. Once we accept that in these instances being trans sets you apart, but that this does not affect our overall acceptance that you are a woman, we can start finding solutions to these particular problems. However, we will never even start looking for solutions if both sides see each other through social justice ideology and identity politics, like we see here. We will get nowhere if they keep claiming that debate is a form of bigotry, that trans women are actually men who are emissaries of the patriarchy, that anyone expressing concern about the safety of women is merely a transphobe, and so forth. But let's talk about the real issue here, the real reason why this conversation cannot take place, and trans activists will attack anyone who dares to raise it up. Here, J.K. Rowling actually hits the nail right on the head. When she discusses the work of Lisa Littman, a researcher who explored the effect of peer pressure on the decision to undergo gender transition, she writes, her paper caused a furor. She was accused of bias and of spreading misinformation about transgender people, subjected to a tsunami of abuse and a concerted campaign to discredit both her and her work. Lisa Littman had dared challenge one of the central tenets of trans activism, which is that a person's gender identity is innate, like sexual orientation. Nobody, the activist insisted, could ever be persuaded into being trans. Exactly, the belief that gender identity is innate. This is what is behind all this, and Rowling is correct in calling it out as false. Let's unpack this. We talked about biological sex and gender expression as the two criteria that define one's gender, but social justice trans ideology adds a third criterion: gender identity. The idea is that you are born knowing what your gender is. In other words, your gender identity is independent from your biological sex and gender expression. One can feel comfortable in their male body, and comfortable with expressing themselves in mainly masculine ways, and still claim to be a woman, because their brain tells them that they are a woman. The word woman is somehow part of their nature, so they don't have to feel any gender dysphoria to define themselves as women. And they have now managed to make this idea into a proposed law in Scotland. Now, some people are offended by what I just said. They think it means that I'm saying that their gender identity isn't real, as if they can just stop having that identity if they decide to do so. But that is not what I'm saying. Once you adopt an identity, it becomes second nature to you, and very much part of your being. Throughout history, people have given their lives rather than deny their identity. That's how powerful it is. But second nature still isn't nature. Identity is not innate. You may have noticed that this is the same logic that the TERFs hold. The belief that words are not just signs that we attach to things in nature, but something that is part of nature. The only difference is that TERFs believe that the word female is innate to our nature, whereas trans SJWs believe that it is woman. It's the social justice metaphysics, and both sides of the argument uphold it. So you see, Natalie, you can't avoid talking about metaphysics. You say that you want to focus on fighting for trans rights instead, and that is why you defend the proposed Scottish law. But by defending it, you are affirming the social justice metaphysics. And I know that you personally feel that there is something wrong with this metaphysics. That is why they call you true scum. But because you don't think the metaphysics through, you end up affirming it. Now, the thing about metaphysics is that we have no criterion to determine which one is right. But what we can do is determine which one is right for us. So let's talk about the metaphysics that the SJWs are trying to impose, and see if it is better than what we have in the West today. Is there a metaphysics that believes words are part of nature? Yes, it's the metaphysics of magic. In magic, words are not just arbitrary signs that we invented to label things that we find in nature. The belief is that everything in nature has a name that is part of its nature. If you know what that name is, you hold power over that thing. That is why the wizard can control animals. That is why the witch can cast spells that affect nature. But, I'm sorry to inform you millennials, Hogwarts isn't real. There is nothing magical about this metaphysics that the SJWs are trying to impose. Actually, the idea that words are part of nature used to be part of Western culture. But Natalie, that was a long time ago. You seem very comfortable in 18th century settings, but you will have to go back even further than that. We'll have to go back to the 16th century, before Port Royal, before the Enlightenment. Are you sure that you, a trans woman, would like to go back to those times? If the SJWs succeed in imposing this idea, and get us to accept that words are part of nature, it will affirm the TERF position as well. The argument will then be which word is innate to our nature. Is it female or woman? Right now, the argument takes place within the social justice cult, and the trans are winning, because they are seen as the oppressed and therefore as the ones holding the truth. But once it transcends these boundaries, and the general public will have to decide, who do you think will win, Natalie? Are you sure you want to find out? You see, Natalie, you end up affirming the very logic that oppresses you. And the reason you can't see it is that you are part of a cult. It's the cult of social justice, and all its doctrines are aimed to prevent you from thinking critically, or accept criticism. The best example for it is your views on bigotry.
Is bigot a slur used to silence the females? Joanne wrote in her essay that she was standing up in solidarity with
women who have histories like mine, who've been slurred as bigots for having concerns around single-sex spaces.
Slurred as bigots. There's something so revealing about the claim that bigot is a slur, because so much of indirect bigotry is an attempt to reverse the roles of victim and aggressor. Isn't calling people bigots the real bigotry?
There's something very revealing indeed about the fact that you don't understand how hurtful the word bigot is. When someone uses an anti-Semitic slur against me, it doesn't hurt me at all. I know that they say it not because there's anything wrong with me, but because there is something wrong with them. And I also know that they are the ones who suffer most from their bigotry, because they have to permanently live with their self-consuming hate. So I mainly feel sorry for them. But being called a bigot is the most hurtful thing that you can be called, especially for those of us who have stood up against bigotry and paid the price for it. When the people you try to help then turn around and call you a bigot, it's crushing. SJWs don't get it, because they are part of a cult that changed the definition of bigotry. They define bigotry as prejudice plus power. And since there is no such thing as a human without prejudice, it means that every human that belongs to a group that the SJWs deem to have power is a bigot. Meaning that the SJWs portray all people in that group as bigots. And when you paint all members in a group as something negative, that is, by definition, bigotry.
So no, Mike Huckabee, Homophobic is not a slur. And no, David Silverman, the word racist is not like the N-word. And no, Joanne Rowling, bigot is not a slur. TERF is not a slur. And being cancelled on Twitter may be a form of abuse, but it's not a form of oppression.
Totally irrelevant if it is a form of oppression or not. Bigotry is bigotry, no matter who upholds it. And smearing someone as a bigot, just because they disagree with your metaphysics, is indeed a form of bigotry. A lot has been said about the damage that the changing of the definition of bigotry has done to the ability to effectively point out and fight actual bigots. A lot has also been said about how it hindered the left from preventing the rise of Donald Trump. But what is now being revealed, through this story, is what it has done to the SJWs themselves.
Joanne claims that
none of the gender-critical women I've talked to hates trans people. On the contrary, many of them become interested in this issue in the first place out of concern for trans youth, and they're hugely sympathetic towards trans adults who simply want to live their lives.
But the only gender-critical women she mentions by name are Maya Forstater, who I would not describe as hugely sympathetic to trans adults, and Magdalene Burns.
You are fucking blackface actors. You aren't women. You're men who get sexual kicks from being treated like women. Fuck you and your dirty fucking perversions. Our oppression isn't a fetish. You pathetic, sick fuck.
Hugely sympathetic. Hugely sympathetic.
You really don't get it, do you, Natalie? The TERFs are actually sympathetic to transgendered people. So where is all this hate that you're receiving from them coming from? Well, they hate you not because you are trans. They hate you because you are, in their eyes, men. This is the end result of decades of rabid bigotry towards men, which was allowed to fester within the radical feminist movement. For decades, men have been demonized, dehumanized, and infantilized in the writings of feminists, until it turned into blind, searing hate. Since they saw themselves as the oppressed, they rejected any claim that this might be bigotry, and claimed that it is rather those criticizing them who are the bigots. And now, all this bile is turned against trans women. But it has come back to bite the feminists in the ass, because the trans movement is now using the same logic on them. But Natalie, don't you see how this will one day come back to bite you in the ass? It has already started, hasn't it? You correctly point out that Janice Raymond's suggestion to send transgendered people to so-called feminist consciousness-raising therapy is the equivalent of preachers wanting to send gays to gay conversion therapy. But where does this idea come from, Natalie? It comes from the feminist belief that masculinity is a form of disease, and that only the feminists have the cure. When MRAs tried to suggest ways to deal with problems men faced, they were shouted down by radical feminists, who claimed that only feminists should be allowed to present a cure to these problems. Now, par for the course, they are trying to shout you down, and claim that only they have a cure to your problem. And as long as you keep upholding social justice values, you will provide affirmation to these claims. The alternative, Natalie, and any other trans person watching this video, is liberal values. Stop thinking that the system is against you, and that you must destroy Western culture to get your rights. You live in a society that sincerely wants you to be able to live out your identity and achieve self-actualization and happiness. All you have to do is work together with everyone to solve the problems that stand in your way, while respecting the rights and concerns of other groups. But if you keep talking about systemic systems of systematic cisnormativity, if you keep trying to impose your language on everyone, if you keep sabotaging our attempts to fight against bigotry, you will end up not only hurting many people, but also hurting yourselves and the cause that you are fighting for. And the same goes for you, Joanne. You are a compassionate woman, you don't want to hurt anyone, and yet, you end up causing immense pain. Many transgendered people grew up on your books, and found solace in the story of a boy who lived in a cupboard until he realized that he had another identity. They looked up to you, and now you are shattering their world. And none of it is necessary. None of it. There are solutions to the problem of trans women in women's spaces, that don't necessitate denying that trans women are women. But you can't view it in any other way than through the lens of radical feminism, through the belief that this whole thing is just a new form of systemic bigotry against women. And so you end up writing things like this. We're living through the most misogynistic period I've experienced. Back in the 80s, I imagined that my future daughters, should I have any, would have it far better than I ever did. But between the backlash against feminism and a porn-saturated online culture, I believe things have gone significantly worse for girls. Never have I seen women denigrated and dehumanized to the extent they are now. From the leader of the free world's long history of sexual assault accusations and his proud boast of grabbing them by the pussy, to the incel movement that rages against women who won't give them sex, to the trans activists who declare that TERFs need punching and re-educating, men across the political spectrum seem to agree. Women are asking for trouble. Everywhere, women are being told to shut up and sit down, or else. Joanne, you have been very careful in the article not to say that trans women are men. But what does it mean when you count the trans activists among your list of men across the political spectrum? Did you just reveal that deep inside you actually do think of them as men? Have you considered that maybe this is why they are hostile to you? Did the possibility cross your mind that maybe the backlash against feminism is not due to misogyny, but because it makes otherwise good people say shit like this? Could it be that people voted for Donald Trump despite his misogyny, because your movement has rendered the term misogyny meaningless? Are you really incapable of seeing what this ideology is turning you into? This was supposed to be just a short, throwaway video, to give you something to watch while I am working on one of my deep diving videos. But as I dove into the subject, I became engulfed, and, moreover, sad. It was actually painful to make. The problems that are discussed here have solutions, and these people all live in societies that are eager to find these solutions. But their minds have been warped by an ideology, which has branched in two diametrically opposed directions. And because of this ideology, they are now demonizing each other, hating each other, oppressing each other, canceling each other, and causing a lot of unnecessary pain. The election of Donald Trump shifted the focus of the left towards him, and prevented us from properly dealing with the social justice scourge in our midst. Now that Trump is gone, we need to deal with it. Look what it's doing.